Welcome back. I am so excited about our next guest, Jim Silbernagel. He's been in the business since the 1980s. He's helped many generations of Wisconsins retire happy and successful. Not only the parents, the grandparents, going down to the great-grandchildren at times. So he helps his people save money, grow it, protect it, and then distribute it, and also pass on values as a legacy. So Jim, welcome to the show. Why is it so important to not just work with the parents and the grandparents, but also with the kids?
Well, first of all, Tom, thanks for having me here. And the thing about having multi-generations, you hear the stories of, from wealth to poverty and 2 or 3 generations. And, the problem is, that communication about money just isn't there. And people don't know how to have that communication. So we kind of dubbed ourselves the home of the family meeting. And part of our process is that we bring the kids in when mom and dad feel they're ready and make sure that those values are passed to the next generation. And then for grandparents, a lot of times we're setting up 529 plans for the grandchildren and maybe setting up IRAs when they get their first job. And if they don't learn the basics of how to invest, how to stay the course, the ups and downs in the market, first time the market goes down, they're going to panic and get out and never invest again. So you want to make sure those values are passed down from generation to generation.
Yeah, and I think children can learn so much from their parents and grandparents because the parents and grandparents made mistakes when they were younger. I know we both made mistakes in finances, and we can pass that on to the children. So You've started a podcast, the Real Wealth podcast, which has just gone crazy. It's everywhere. But why did you start it, and what's the primary goal?
Well, if you look back to the 90s and early 2000s, basically families were okay as long as they had the SUV in the driveway and had enough room on their credit card to take the kids on vacation. And spending seemed to be out of control. You look at the debt, credit card debt, student loan debt, all that stuff was skyrocketing. And I think the problem was people didn't have the basic understanding of financial literacy. So my goal is if we can at least be a cog in the wheel to help with financial literacy, along with folks like you and others that are shouting the message from the mountaintops. I look at government as of the people, by the people, and we have national debt that's running out of control. Well, how can we hold our government accountable if our own households aren't accountable?
Yeah, I mean, how this whole book started was I was asked to do a presentation on financial wellness, so I had to dig into it, and I was amazed at how financial wellness is tied to physical wellness, emotional wellness, mental wellness, but it sounded boring, so instead of calling it financial wellness, I called it Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? But that's all about this financial literacy, which you're doing a great job trying to educate Americans, old and young, on how to retire the right way, how to save, and how to invest. So how do you encourage people to prioritize saving and wealth building over spending? It's a lot more fun to spend money. It's not as much fun to save money for some people.
Well, it's the mindset. You got to teach people how to have the right mindset. I mean, everybody's heard about, you got to save first and pay yourself first. But the habits that people have, that's so hard to do. So you need tools. And the thing is with, when I look at that whole thing, I read a book a while back called Prodigal Son, Material Girl, How Not to Be Your Child's ATM. And this is written probably 25 years ago. And they talked about before, and this is before social media, that the average 18-year-old had millions of messages, buy now, you deserve it, easy payments, no payments for 180 days, all this stuff to buy early. And you look at one of the lessons the greatest generation gave us is you don't buy stuff unless you have the money. Well, now with such easy credit, it's so easy to spend money. So there's a couple things that people need to do. Number one is they have to take the time to sit down and figure out what their cash flow is and be able to separate it from wants and needs. If you look at, you might need tennis shoes, but you don't, that might be good, but you want Air Jordans. You don't have to spend the money on Air Jordans to take care of it. And that's not to say you shouldn't have Air Jordans, but if every decision you make is based on wants and not needs, there's not going to be any money left. So the thing is, you need to get a good good handle on your budget, you need to identify what are needs, what are wants, and then prioritize. And if you want to save for the future, we have a tool that we've used with our clients, an app called Currents. And if you check that out, we've been helping a lot of clients. But when they first tested that product, there was the average person was putting 30% of their after-tax earnings into savings. That's 6 times the national average. And what it works toward is the mentality of saving first. And how they do that is you determine ahead of time how much money is going into this account, and then that account automatically separates from the consumption account and the wealth building account. Well, now you have to make a conscientious decision to actually spend money versus the opposite. So, for example, when you get a raise, when you get a bonus, instead of that all just going to your regular checking account, when it's in there, well, the kitchen needs remodeling, we need a new boat, we need this, we need that, and people have a tendency to spend it as long as it's in that account. Well, if we've predetermined that if we get bonuses, if we get raises, that 100% of that's going into my wealth building because I was able to live on that pre-bonus or pre-raise income, well then I've got a lot more money going into my wealth building. But it doesn't have to be all of it. What if it's just 10%? That's 10% more than most people do today.
Yeah, I just see so many people spending their retirements away, and not only that, they're taking out loans, they're taking out car loans, and I always encourage people, don't take out a loan to put money into a depreciating asset, right? Because you're going to be spending more, and the asset's going down and down in value. On depreciating assets, you want to pay that when you have the money. On appreciating assets, you can do something different, but you want to put the majority of your money into things that are going up. But that depends on delayed gratification, which is what you talk about a lot as well.
Oh, absolutely. There's a Stanford research study. It's the marshmallow experiment. And if people can look that up online, it's really interesting. They took, I think it was 4-year-old kids, and they put a marshmallow in front of them and said, you can have this marshmallow, but if you wait till I come back, I'll bring you another marshmallow and you can have 2. And a number of the kids were successful in delaying that gratification, but a very big number of them, they just couldn't wait and started eating that first marshmallow. Now what's interesting is they followed up with those people much later on, and what they found is the kids that had the ability to delay gratification went further in school, went further in their careers, did a better job saving. So it's something that all of us as Americans, we need to have balance. It doesn't mean you have to have one or the other, but you have to have balance. And if you don't have your priorities where you're putting a little away for the future, it's okay to spend now as long as you're taking care of that. But a lot of people wait, they're 50, 55 years old, and all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, I got 5 years to save for retirement. Well, you're probably gonna have to work a little bit longer.
In our previous segment, we had David McKnight, and I know you're friends with David as well. And you and him and me as well, we all kind of have the same formula. You should give 10% to charity, you should save 20%, and then spend the other 70%. And if people just followed that simple formula, they're going to be a lot more successful. How do you get people to have that delayed gratification with every paycheck? I mean, you've got some tools that you've developed that can help them.
The problem with most budgets that people do is it's always looking in the rearview mirror. And people are always guesstimating. And one thing is, I see a lot of people prepare budgets where I tell them, here, use our tool, break it down. Well, I already got all that. And they do a spreadsheet, and one of the items is credit card bill. And they're charging everything on it. They have no idea what they're spending in any different areas. And I hate the word budget because that's a limiting tool. I see it as a freedom document, because if you really do a good job at it, when your head hits the pillow at night, you know what you're safe to spend, whether you're saving for retirement or you're in retirement, if you do a very detailed budget. And then it's just a matter of prioritization. I mean, if you want a new car every 3 years, maybe you're not going to Europe every year on vacation, but you still can have vacations and you still can have a car. It's just a matter of prioritizing what's most important and living within your cash flow.
And you kind of use a bucketing strategy, don't you, to try to help people with that?
Absolutely. I'm a big big believer. Our good friend Curtis coined the term buy income, invest the difference. The money that you need on the short term, you can't have in publicly traded stocks and bonds unless you got a boatload more money than you need. And for most people, they're trying to stretch every dollar they have. And that's your short-term money, taking the risk out of that, the sequence of returns risk. But long-term, you know, you need to keep up with inflation. And other than stocks and real estate, there's not too many things that stay pace or maybe even grow a little bit above the inflation rate historically. So for long term, that's where inflation becomes an issue. That's where you need that long-term bucket.
So, and you do a lot with saying that you shouldn't take your every raise and just go out and spend it. And I was the same way. I'd say, whatever your pay raise is, take half of that raise, save it, and then spend the other half. Because otherwise you get what Curtis also calls lifestyle creep.
Oh, absolutely. And you know, knowing human nature and the psychology of spend, 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 I start out with putting the whole thing away and hope we settle at half. You know, because I can't begin to say the amount of families that I've worked with, and they come from, all of a sudden they get this great new position, and then it's the vacation, it's the remodeling, the new house, the upgrade. And the problem is with the house, let's say you decide to upgrade your house and spend $150,000 on the new house. Well, that isn't $150,000. It's the interest on that for most people. It's the extra property taxes, the maintenance, the upkeep, and all that stuff.
More insurance, all that stuff, yeah.
And a lot of people don't take the time to put a pencil to that, and all of a sudden they're so short on cash, they're just working for the bank because they're paying all these payments to everybody, and they're working for their local government, they're working for all this, and there's nothing left for them.
I see that with cars all the time. I just think cars are the one thing, if people could just be wiser with their car purchases, because that's the biggest depreciating asset most people put money into, and it costs them millions of dollars. You know, there are more couples now today that have $1,000 a month car payments each than ever before. So I took that $2,000 a month, plugged it into a time value money calculator. In 30 years, it's 3.9 million. In 40 years, it's over 7 million, and in 50 years, it's 15.9 million. They're driving away their future, and then they forget about the gas, they forget about the insurance, they forget about all the other things, and it's just a common problem. And that's why I think it's so important that you're doing what you're doing. Taxes are a big deal too. And I know you help people reduce or eliminate unnecessary taxes. So talk a little bit about that.
So the problem with most people is they don't even understand the taxes, you know, and most tax software that the accounting firms use will print a report for the people showing the effective tax rate. And what that does, so our tax rates are like a staircase. The first couple of bucks is your standard deduction or itemized deduction. There's no tax on that. Then the next step is 10%, then 12%, then 22%, and it goes all the way up to 37%. But it's only the money over the step that hits that higher bracket. So when they tell you the effective rate, it's the blended rate of all these brackets. So they'll get a thing that says, oh, your effective rate is 17.3%. Well, there's no 17.3% tax rate. And what they don't understand is if they hit that next bracket, you know, they might be at 24%. You know, so a lot of times people, when they're putting away for their retirement accounts, for example, they're right at the fringe. And in the area that I work, most of the people are in the fringe of between the 12 and the 22% bracket. That's a pretty big difference. And if they're getting close to retirement, they might be in a 12% bracket, but they read a newspaper, someone in the lunchroom said they should put all their money into a Roth, where they're paying the tax at 22 and then they're going to save 12. Well, that doesn't make sense. And then on the other hand, I see people that do all deductible and you know, they're in a 12% bracket. They might be in a 22 when they retire. You know, so if you don't understand those brackets, it's the biggest expense. And I get a kick out of people that are do-it-yourselfers where they're like, oh, I'm going to invest in this no-load fund. I don't need an advisor. And the average advisor fee in this country might be 1.5%. But when you look at the top tax bracket of 37%, and you add state, and here we are recording this in New York, they have a city income tax. I mean, if you're not paying attention to that, that's the most expensive. And you can't just look at the tax rates today. What are the rates going to be when you're drawing it out? Yeah,
and then there's inheritance taxes too in some states. States have an inheritance tax that whack them again.
And the federal rates, you know, right now most people are not affected by federal estate taxes, and they kind of forget about them. I've got a lot of clients that are small business owners that they don't have to worry about estate taxes today, but in 2026 they're going to need to, because the estate tax exemption is coming way down, and a lot more people are going to be affected by that. And that rate right now is 43%. So they tax you when you're earning it, they tax you when you're saving it, they tax you when you want to pass it on. And if you're not paying attention to it while your doctor just gave you 6 months to live, that's not the time to do the planning. The planning is every single year, and whatever you can do to save on that is going to be better for you, it's going to be better for your spouse. And that's one thing I see so many families, when you talk about legacy planning, they think of kids, they think of grandkids. Well, what about the spouse? What happens for most Americans when one spouse dies? What happens is the brackets get cut in half and the deductions get cut in half. We did a case study a while back where someone lost 13% of their income when their husband died, and that was the Social Security check. Okay, their taxable income only went down 4%, and that's because more of Social Security became taxable at a higher rate for a single person than it did for them as a couple. The actual dollars paid in taxes, actual dollars, went up 63% for the surviving spouse. So if they're not paying attention to that stuff and planning for it, I mean, that's why you've got a lot of widows and widowers that can't go out for lunch with their friends anymore because now they can't afford it. Right. So that's important.
And all that could have been fixed with some prior planning. And that's why it's so important. I think it's so important to sit down with a financial professional. Look, I know this stuff in and out. I work with financial professionals because, look, if there's 10,000 products out there, I don't know which one is the very best. I know what I should have, but I don't know exactly which company. And they change every 2 weeks or every week in some companies. So that's why I think it's so important to work with a financial professional.
I just got to share with you, Robert Kiyosaki, the author of Rich Dad, Poor Dad, was one of the first guests on my podcast back in the early 2000s. And he said, I can't believe you're having me on a podcast. You're a financial advisor. Financial advisors hate me because I teach people how to do it themselves. I said, well, then they didn't read the whole book, because in your book, you said that if someone didn't have at least 10 hours a week to dedicate to whatever they're doing themselves, they should hire a professional, and you hire professionals. And that's good advice, because I don't believe everybody needs to come to me. I mean, if they're staying educated and staying on top of it, they don't need me. But I look at it, and if people ever did the math on what their time is worth, or what are they giving up? Are they giving up baseball games with their kids or grandkids so they can study the stock reports? I mean, it's insane. And so when you look at it, if their average hourly rate is, let's say, $50 an hour, 10 hours, that's $500 a week, that's $30,000 a year. Most people's fees for financial professionals that do this for a living is a lot less than $30,000 a year.
So Jim, let's bring this in for a landing. How can younger individuals set themselves up for success with all the things that are going on, with the debt and the taxes and inflation and everything?
I think there's really a number of key things, but the biggest ones I would say is, number one, know your cash flow. And we have a budget tool that on the screen, you can Google it and you get it for free. It's a detailed cash flow and explains each item on there. And number two, set your priority savings goals. And we have an app that we refer people to, and you can get that information on there too. But the third thing is, I'm a big believer in using a financial professional. Now, that's biased because that's what I do, but not just anyone. You want to have somebody who pays attention to taxes, who pays attention to what future tax rates, who looks at your cash flow, not just what'd you make last year, how much did you spend, okay, that's the difference and we can invest it in this. You want someone who's going to take the time and really have a plan and a strategy for you to get you where you want to be when you want to be there.
Yeah, and you've got a story, I think, about Jim, right? That he was laid off and...
Oh yeah. So one thing is, and this has to do with tax credits. And we had the Secure Act 2.0 pass at the end of last year, and there's over 90 provisions that affect people in retirement. And they've expanded the tax credits. Now, to understand a tax credit is a dollar for dollar offset on what you owe. Most people are familiar with deductions, where it comes off of what you earned and you pay tax on the rest. So say, for example, you have a $1,000 credit versus a $1,000 deduction. Now, let's say you're just in the 10% bracket. Well, if I have a deduction, that means $1,000 won't be taxed at 10%. I save $100. With a $1,000 credit, if I have a $1,000 credit, it'll take $1,000 off what I owe. So it's 10 times as more powerful in that example. So I had a couple that came in, they've been working with me for years, and I've been trying to get him in for a review. He was recently laid off. They did not want to come in for a review, and he just decided he'd retire early. So he never got another job, but in that job, he had already put away $1,500 into his 401k. And we have a tax practice, and we were looking at his tax returns, and I saw that if he put $500 more into an IRA, he would save $750 in taxes. So I knew this was important for me to talk to him, even though they were avoiding me. So I knew when they were coming in the office, I just stopped them when they were there, said hello, and they'd say, "Oh, Jim, we don't have any money to invest." And I said, well, you know, I understand that, but I'm not just a guy there to get investments from you. I'm here to help you strategize on how to get more and get your money to work harder for you. So I said, you know, there's a thing called the saver's credit. Because you were laid off early in the year, your income is well below the level you need where you can't get saver's credits. I mean, you've never been eligible for them, but now you are, and your income was $500 more than what it would take to get a 50% credit versus a 20% credit. And that credit wasn't just on whatever they would contribute now, but his past contributions to his 401k. Well, to make a long story short, he goes, well, I don't have the $500 to invest. I said, that's fine. You're in here early enough. All you have to do is commit to it. So we will put it down in your tax return that you're putting $500 into a deductible IRA that gets your income down low enough to get a bigger credit on all the money, and it's going to save you $750 in taxes. So when you get that refund, okay, so now you've got the $500 to put in your IRA, and you put $250 in your pocket. So it's those little details that can make a world of difference for people. And right now, for adjusted gross income, we're going to a point where those tax credits are going to go up to $70,000 of income, which a lot of working people can take advantage of. And there's a phase in with what they're doing with these credits. We did a case study where literally someone just putting a few $1,000s into their IRA, they'd get almost 90% of it back in tax savings, and they even have it where they're going to deposit money into your 401k. So if you're not up to speed and you're not prepping yourself and your advisors aren't talking to you about this, you want to ask them, hey, are there some things I need to be prepared for? Because you don't want to find out about these things after the fact and what you all missed out. You want to be able to take advantage of them as you can.
I think this is why it's so important to work with a financial professional. I don't think the average person could say what you just said and do what you just said. Okay, one last thing before we wrap it up. You talk a lot about how credit scores can affect wealth building. Yeah. Talk about that for just a minute.
You know, I never realized how powerful this was. And I was, you know, one thing is, as a financial professional, I'm constantly taking classes and trying to learn different techniques and things that I can do to help my clients. And I'm in Wisconsin, so it differs from what state that you're in. But I was just flabbergasted by how big of an impact credit scores make. Now, obviously, if you got to pay 1 or 2% more or 3% more on a car loan or a home loan, that can get to be hundreds of thousands of dollars. But the thing that I saw that really hit home, insurance companies for your auto insurance are using credit scores. And in Wisconsin, if your credit score, if you have a low credit score, your premiums can be 102% more than if you have a good credit score. So perfect driving record, everything's the same. One has a low credit score, one has a good credit score. The good credit score to the low credit score, 102% more. Now, what was really the kicker for me that opened my eyes is if you had a drunk driving ticket with the perfect credit score, your premiums would be 60% more, not 102%. So credit score has more of an impact in Wisconsin than does a drunk driving. Now, it varies by state, but again, if you don't know what your credit score is or how to improve your credit score, the cost that you have goes way beyond the interest you're paying on loans that you might have through the bank.
Yeah, and people might think that's not right or not fair, but the numbers show that people with low credit scores tend to make more claims on their homeowners and auto than people with high credit scores, and that's why it happens. So, what factors should people consider when deciding between deductible and non-deductible retirement? So an IRA versus a Roth IRA, or a 401k versus a Roth 401k?
Yeah, that goes back to what are your credits, or what is your bracket now? How close are you to the next bracket? Because we just had somebody in our office where she was doing all Roth IRAs, okay, and she was fully paying the full funding amount, and she's a couple years away from retirement. Well, she was $2,000 into the 22% bracket. I said, well, what we're going to do is we're going to take $2,000, put in a deductible. The rest we're going to put into Roth, because her tax bracket in retirement, with the income that she wanted and the sources of income where she was going to get it at, she was going to be in the 12% bracket. So we saved 10% on that $2,000 for the years that before she retires, and the amount of money that we saved will pay her electric bill for 2 years. And all it is just making a small adjustment. Right. But if you don't know where that is, there's going to be a problem. Now, we've got a lot of people who haven't saved for retirement, and there's no way they're going to be in the same bracket. They're way behind the 8 ball, so getting the deduction is going to help them more. So you can mix and match. It can be all one, all the other, but that's where you need to sit down with a financial professional that knows this stuff to help guide you, so you optimize every deposit that you make.
And you can also do Roth conversions, and there's backdoor conversions. Even if people make a lot of money, there's ways that they can still take advantage of Roth.
Oh, absolutely. And if you look, the top 2 tax brackets that a lot of people are in is the 12 and the 22, right? I mean, that's middle America. And when you look at it, those brackets are increasing from 12% to 15%. That's a 25% increase on the dollars in that bracket of what you're going to pay. And then you have the 22 going to 25, and the other thing that they can get you on is they bring the brackets down. So not only are the rates going to be increasing, but the brackets are coming down, and that's in 2026. So the thing is, it's not a matter of if you're going to pay taxes, it's when and how much. And to do those conversions now, it also can be done before you start collecting Social Security, because if you have too much income, you're going to pay tax on your Social Security. And what about IRMA? Premiums on Medicare. They started with one bracket, and now they've got all these different brackets where the premiums can be almost 4 times as much depending on where your earnings are. Those are those stealth taxes that nobody really knows about. So paying the taxes now before you're in those things, I mean, we literally have people living in a tax-free retirement because of the planning they did along the way.
What about some overlooked aspects of financial planning for young people? Things like if their parents need long-term care, there's some things that people overlook.
We have a caregiver crisis in the country right now, and most people in their 30s and 40s, they're not even thinking about it. But guess what? Their parents are reaching the ages where the likelihood that they will need long-term care is increasing. Now, what's the definition of long-term care? It's a stay that's expected to last 90 days or more, and it's going to be an ongoing thing. You got things like Alzheimer's, where the median the median years that people suffer from that is 8. That means there's just as many people that live longer as die sooner. But if that happens to your parents, the problem that I see is everybody thinks of mom and dad and the condition they're in. Oh, they can just come in the house and they can cook and clean while I'm at work. Well, that's not the case.
Right.
Some of them need 24-hour care. Some of them need their diapers changed. Some of them need help getting lifted out of bed and all those kind of things. And let's face it, a lot of people that are the caregivers, okay, if they're the kids, they're already reaching retirement, and you see injuries happen to them where they end up in a long-term care facility. So one of the things that you should be talking to your parents about is what is their plan. And one thing is, I just had a family, and we're doing a family meeting, and I asked what the plan was. She says, I'm never going to a nursing home. And the kids were already sharing time, staying with her, and she's okay. Her husband just died, and she didn't want to be home alone. So they're sharing time there. And I said to her, well, that might be a good goal, but at what point is it okay for you to go somewhere where they can take care of you, where your kids might not be able to? And I started talking to her, she says, I never really thought of that. Because people always put in perspective what's around them today. They don't look to that future.
Well, Jim, this has been great. How can people follow you? Where can they find you? If they want more information, how can they deal with you?
All right, well, there's a QR code. Just get a copy of that QR code, and we got those tools available for you that you can find for that. But we work with people all over the country, and if you need help, I mean, find yourself somebody that can help you, you know, and make sure they're talking about taxes, make sure they're talking about cash flow, because that's how you get the optimal results. A couple hundred here, a couple hundred there, and before you know it, you've got a secure financial future.
And they can Google real wealth and they can find you.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you, Jim. It's been great.
All right. Well, thanks, Tom. It's been a pleasure.